before we get started today, I just want to go on record here and note that. So last week there was this obviously big segment that I put at the beginning of the video about all the Malort discussions. I tried last week to make a Malort cocktail. Didn't work. It didn't.
At what point in your head did that make sense?
I mean, I figured you could do something with it. And the funny thing too
Arsenic?
is that, yeah,
rat poison.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I could drink some Drano or something. Maybe that.
Yeah.
Actually, it's funny is Malort's social media is pretty funny, and they've actually like put me on there a few times in the last like week and a half for my support of their beverage. But I mean, they know it's not good, and like they have videos of and pictures of like there was a wedding recently where a bride and groom for the toast, instead of doing champagne, they all did shots of Malort, and they posted like the collage of the faces of everybody after they drank the Malort. It was quite funny. But then I tried to mix it with some Dr. Pepper, and it was like oil and water. You couldn't taste the Dr. Pepper. The Malort just still stood out. So still experimenting. We'll find something to do with that, but I have to finish that bottle. I do not let things go to waste. So on that note, this is a new segment that we're doing for the first time. This was Kate's idea, so I'm going to let her take the lead.
Okay. So welcome to our first episode of Play by Play, where we're going to read books that are sports related or journalism related and talk about them. And yes, for the record, DJ's doing book on tapes.
I can read.
So it'll be hosted by myself and DJ. And to kick it off, our first book was Talking to Goats with Jim Gray. So DJ, want to give a quick summary?
So Jim Gray, he was, still is. He's an interviewer. He's been on, worked for NBC, he's worked for Fox,
ESPN,
HBO, or was it Showtime? But anyway, he always seems to find himself either involved or in the presence of the craziest events of the last 30 years. And going through this book, the thing that stood out to me is, one, he's been around some very incredible people and has talked to incredible people. And this was set up as he's talking to goats, and the cover goes through and he says Ali, Jordan, Tiger, Kobe, Phelps, Tyson, LeBron. I mean, this really is his memoir of his experiences. And there's just some wild stuff in here, especially with like Mike Tyson. He gets in and he talks about his friendship with Mike Tyson at the very beginning. And one of the things that stood out to me, which we'll get into in a little bit, is his infamous Pete Rose interview at the World Series back in the late 90s.
Okay, so thanks for that summary. I really enjoyed this book. I don't know about you. I wanted to share I wanted to share a quote that really resonated with me, and it's from the Tom Brady chapter, which anyone who's listened to this podcast knows I'm not the biggest Tom Brady fan because I think he's overhyped. But I know. But I have to admit, after reading this book, that yeah, he does deserve the title of GOAT. So the quote that really resonated with me was, he has thrown the perfect pass, played the perfect quarter, and led the perfect comeback. He wants to be able to do it again and again, but he can't. No one can. You can touch perfection, but you cannot hold on to it or take it home with you. If you're great enough, you can borrow it like Tom has.
That proves just one thing right there. It proves that you read the first 10 pages of the book, because that's the introduction.
What? No?
Oh, are you actually? Oh, you're reading his. Okay, never mind.
I didn't Read from the forward, asshole. This is on page 177.
But yes, Tom Brady wrote the forward to the book.
Did you read the appendix too, DJ?
I did.
And the index?
Yes, I did. Like I said, just the craziest thing about this book is that, Jim Gray happened to he happened to get word about Tiger Woods when he was a kid, and he was a young kid, like 5 years old, and he managed to, he took the trip out there. He wasn't working. I don't think he was working for anybody yet. I think he was just kind of, contract work for ESPN. I think it was at the time of his career. And he was trying to break in and make a name for himself. And here's the story about this like 5-year-old kid who's like playing golf at a, probably better than I do today. And he goes out there and meets him. He talks to him and he shoots this video. And a few years later, Tiger now all of a sudden is on the big stage. He's the youngest Masters champion. And all of a sudden Nike is making commercials and using the footage from Jim's interview that he recorded when Tiger, the clip of Tiger about saying he's going to be the best. He's like 5 years old. Jim Gray was the one who recorded that interview and owned the property. And they didn't get Jim's permission to use that in this ad campaign. They just the Woods family just sent this over. And it wasn't anything malicious. And Jim goes into that in this book that, he doesn't think Nike did anything to, try to screw him or anything. It was just an honest mistake. But it's still funny that this interview that kind of helped bring Jim into the mainstream ended up being used as like hey, Tiger Woods is here. He's now a big, huge star.
Yeah, that was interesting because I didn't realize Tiger started playing that early.
I did from the commercial from, 20 years ago.
Oh, you mean back when you were an adult?
Yes.
And I was still a kid?
Yes.
DJ, want to share your quote?
Yeah, so like I said, Jim Gray always seemed to find himself either in the tensest situations, or in the craziest of events. And a lot of people first heard of Jim Gray probably from a infamous boxing match in the late 90s involving Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield that involved a piece of Evander Holyfield's ear going missing.
I still can't believe that he was there.
Well, yeah, it's boxing is his number one thing. And the craziest thing of all is like, you, as an outsider, you're watching this. I remember where I was. I'm pretty sure it was a pay-per-view event, but we were watching it at my parents' house as a kid, and all of a sudden, Tyson just, to the outsider, it looks like Tyson just went in there and just bit his ear off for no reason because, hey, this guy's a loose cannon. He's been to jail, and like this guy's nuts. And then like Jim, who had this relationship with Tyson, went down there after the fight and just basically said, well, like, what were you doing? And he showed him that like Evander Holyfield was headbutting him in the face. And I don't know if he broke his orbital bone in his eye, but this was the complaint from the previous fight that Holyfield was headbutting him and it wasn't being called. And finally Tyson snapped and just bit his ear off.
Retaliated. Yeah.
And it just, the thing that Jim posts, talks about Tyson, and the thing is, I'm not even answering your question. This wasn't even my quote. I just, I had to preface this, but he always said that Tyson was a guy that always told him the truth. He would always, tell where he stood on things. Even in like a moment like that, he didn't hide behind his people. He didn't hide behind Don King. He went out there and said like, hey, this is what I was thinking. It's like, sounds crazy, but it's just like, man, this is pretty authentic, I guess is the right way.
Yeah.
So a couple of years later at the World Series, there's an infamous interview from, I believe, 1999. They were introducing the all-century baseball team, and Pete Rose was voted in because he was one of the best players of the century, if not top 5, top 10. but he had been banned from baseball the decade before for gambling, denied to this day, or not, well, up to that point, he denied it to that day. And Pete was on the field. Jim set up and interviewed him, and he kind of misjudged the whole, like, here's what it feels like at the stadium. Here's what it feels like at home. And it was just like this big orchestra at home and this big moment. And then, a lot of people felt that Jim kind of ruined it by going in and saying, hey, Pete, do you want to admit that you actually did gamble? And it just turned into this awkward, really tense interview on live television. And a lot of people are upset with him, very upset with him. Resulted in a lot of death threats. Members of the New York Yankees in the World Series that year were
refusing to talk to him.
They were refusing to talk to him. And player Chad Curtis hit a home run to win the game. And, Jim was on the field and doing the post-game interview like he was there to do. And Chad walked up to him and he said, I congratulate him and asked him the most neutral question I could possibly have left my lips. In fact, I didn't even ask a question. Chad, tell us about that pitch. I can't do it, he said. As a team, we kind of decided because of what happened with Pete, we're not going to talk about it here on the field. He had waited by my side for a minute to say this on the air simply to embarrass me. Then he added, I do want to say it was for you, though, Grandma. Thanks. He turned to walk off. Chad, I asked, you don't want to talk about the home run? He was gone. So what could you do about that situation? All right, Bob Costas, I said, back upstairs to you. That, in the minute before they went live on television with this, no mention of this. They purposely waited to do this live on TV to humiliate him. And, they later found out that, the Yankees didn't agree to this. Chad Curtis was kind of a tool. And, looking in later, he actually got himself into some legal trouble for some things we're not going to discuss here. It was not a good guy. But anyway, then the next part of it was he went back to the hotel. He had his security with him because he was getting death threats for this Pete Rose interview. And by the way, Pete never said no topic is off limits. Like he said, hey, I'm going to ask you this. And Pete never said no. Like, you ask me whatever you want. And then he did. And then Pete got all combative with him over it. So he really, I guess he kind of should have expected the backlash for this. But at the same time, it's like, he did his prep. He warned beforehand, and it still blew up in his face. And everything all turned when he went back to his hotel that night. He had a security guard sitting outside his door because he, feared for his life. And there's a knock at his door. Looks out. It was George Steinbrenner, the longtime owner of the Yankees, and he was at his door and he asked if he could come in. And George says, I want you to know a few things. First of all, I didn't think that interview was that bad. Second, what happened tonight at the stadium doesn't represent the way the New York Yankees organization feels about you. It doesn't represent my feelings. You are always welcome at Yankee Stadium. And don't worry about that player, what he said tonight. He won't be here much longer. If we are fortunate enough to win this series, I'm very cautious about counting on anything before that happens. There will not be a single Yankee who will act inappropriately during the trophy presentation. And that happened. It was very tense, and you could see that he was hanging out next to the Yankees dugout after this, and players were just kind of giving him death stares. And after that, Steinbrenner had this reputation of being, kind of nuts, but his people respected him, and he put a stop to it. And it kind of put a new perspective on George Steinbrenner, who, always thought was kind of an arrogant jerk, but it's he really stepped up big for him and really put a stop to it. People are still to this day, he said, come and comment about that to him, but still that could have got really out of hand, and Steinbrenner stepped up big for him. Hang on one second. Okay, sorry.
So, one thing I really enjoyed about this book is that it covered both the good and the bad.
Mm-hmm.
Last night I was flipping through it, reminding myself of what I had read, and I locked in on the LeBron chapter where the decision was filmed.
Ah, yes.
And it had backlash. So
Another
I really.
backlash. Another backlash. It seems to be a recurring trend of this book.
Yeah. So one thing that really got to me was overall in this book he talks about talking to all these people, all these famous athletes, but he admits not everything is perfect. And as starting out our podcast, and even now we're not perfect.
No.
And while we don't get the backlash that he gets at the national level, we could potentially say something at some point. So this book was filled with great lessons.
Did you watch the decision? Like, did you watch it at live? I did.
No.
I remember where I was when I was actually sick, like homesick in bed, because it was on at like 8 o'clock. I was already in bed and I was watching TV. And I just remember when, LeBron did his, I'm taking my talents to South Beach line, which I don't think anyone will ever, let him forget that. Just a dumb line. I remember just vividly remember just laughing like, oh my God, Cleveland's going to be on fire tonight. And kind of did. The backlash in Cleveland was pretty bad. I mean, your hometown son just walked out on you, and you would see just jerseys being burnt, and it was messy. I mean, he obviously moved back, went back, patched up the relationship, won a championship, ultimately left again under much less fanfare. But it was ugly. Like, they walked out of thinking, hey, this was pretty good. I think we really did something here. And to find out that nope, this was a disaster. Like, it was ratings gold, but it was a disaster.
Hey, I do have to commend them for donating the profits to the Boys and Girls Club from that episode.
Yes. Yeah, that was noted.
It was I can talk. The single biggest donation to that organization.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of good that came out of it. And I mean, it really kind of changed the landscape of how interviews are held. A lot of journalists were upset by it too, because, when you are reporting something in the sports world, you know that you want to be the guy that breaks the scoop that, hey, we know LeBron's going to Miami. And Jim Gray more or less took that away from these guys, because LeBron and his camp kept their mouths shut. Like, not even the owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers knew what he was doing. And he wrote a pretty nasty letter in response that I'm sure he regrets to this day. But, it just, the reporters were upset. The Cleveland fans were upset. The crowd in general of just okay, you arrogant person, why would you go on and just pat yourself on the back for a half hour? And then the thing kind of dragged on for a while, that people were also upset about it. It's he comes on and announces this decision of what he's going to do. It was this 30-minute long special, and the first 20 minutes of it is oh, how you feeling, how's the family, how's the summer going, are you confident in this decision? And then
what is it?
Just let's go, let's move it along. Oh, let's go to commercial first. But it's just it's a forever will be a major factor, a major sports moment, regardless of what anyone's opinion is.
So, did this book influence your opinion on anything, DJ?
I think the Steinbrenner, I mean, it was more surprising than anything, some of the things. I mean, the Steinbrenner story, it did put a new kind of light on my opinion of him. I was like a lot of people that are like, okay, this guy's just a pompous, arrogant jerk. But it seems like Steinbrenner has this history of like quietly going behind the scenes and backing people, and just reading some of the stories about him. It just, I mean, it changed my opinion of him. Um, and the Tyson stories. I do want to mention this. There's 2 pages in this book with a chapter.
Oh, are you talking about the picture pages that are probably your favorite?
No, it's like two. Yeah, it's 2 pages. This is the entire chapter of his story of Michael Jackson.
Yeah, I remember that. I was texting you when I read it. I'm like, Michael Jackson's in this book?
uh, Basically, I don't want to blow this for anybody, but basically, there's 2 pages in this book, or it's really like just slightly more than a full page of this book. Of He was at a boxing match in the 90s, and Michael Jackson comes into the boxing match, and he sits down, and yeah, the match is over, and everybody's like leaving, and Michael's like, "Oh, is it over?" What?
That sounds like me when I go to sporting events. Like, I understand sports, but sometimes I'm just so like, I look at the bigger picture that I forget the smaller aspects. So I have to say, this book did influence me a little bit. We've always said our biggest like piece of advice in stadium scene is the worst someone can say is no. But Jim constantly is following up, like trying to get that connection. So while the worst someone can say is no, maybe that first no isn't the stopping point.
He also showed, why he has these connections and why he's able to get these assignments in these interviews is he has those connections to these athletes. Like, he worked his way, he built those relationships with these people, like, Al Davis, the late owner of the Raiders. He built these relationships up that, like, Al was pretty open with him, where a lot of reporters, I seemed like he wasn't, but he got in, Tyson, another example. He got to know Muhammad Ali. And the other thing too is that with journalists, you can say that, like, you're supposed to be an unbiased reporter, and it's like, can you be an unbiased reporter if you're becoming friends with these people? And there is criticism of his methods, but at the same time, he's being able to tell these stories and report on these things and get these stories because of those relationships. So it's kind of a double-edged sword here. I'm speaking as not a journalist, but you hear about these journalists that are reporting and they get the scoop before everybody else. It's because of those relationships, because of, they may not be like Michael Jordan or Tiger Woods or something like that, but they've got those relationships in the front office of people, you've probably never heard of, that are scooping them out, like, hey, we're about to go sign this player, we're about to get this contract. And they, they give them that scoop, and that's how they report. And they're the first ones out to say, hey, LeBron James is going to the Lakers and he's signing this deal. Like, somebody leaked that out to him because they have that relationship.
Anything you would change on this book?
No, I don't think so.
I really enjoyed it.
It was very entertaining. I mean, it was very, every chapter was very different. Every experience was very different. Yeah. And we didn't even get into, like, he was at the Malice in the Palace, which we've discussed on here with the Pacers and Pistons fight. His experiences with Ron Artest. He figured out that Michael Jordan was retiring from basketball the first time before he went to play baseball. I mean, it's just, it seemed like if there was a major sports story,
he was on it.
He was there, or he knew how to get himself there to report on it.
Yeah. So one of the goats he talks about is his dad. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought that was really like personal and really gave the human aspect to this book. Because while, yes, we know he's a human, we see him right here. I don't know. Have you seen Men in Black?
Yeah, no, we're just not going there.
We're not going there today.
No, we're not going there.
But the fact he talks about his experiences with his dad at the Masters and golfing, the biggest influence in most people's lives are their parents. So I thought that was a really great way to include the personal aspect.
And I mean, he tells the story of he would go to the Masters and cover the Masters for many years, and his dad would come with him, and they'd climb up the tower together. And he talks about for over a decade they did this, and it got to the point where his father was too old and he couldn't climb up there with him anymore, and it just kind of like it was in a way it was sad. I mean, it was they had this long time connection, and it was just like he knew like the moment it hit him that it's like his time is almost up.
Okay, so to wrap up on the book, 1 to 10, 1 being you're burning this book the minute we finish this podcast, 10 being you're going to reread it multiple times. How do you rate this book?
We give it a 9.
I was going with a 7. I probably will not reread it. However, I do not regret reading it. I think it's full of great stories and great information.
I think I don't think I would fully reread this, but I think there are stories in this that I would reread, and quite a few stories actually. It was I found it very enjoyable because, I mean, his career spans from my childhood to today, and it's like I have a lot of memories growing up of these stories, and it really hit close to me that it's like I remember watching this live on television. I remember this story live on television. I remember where I was when Tyson bit off Holyfield's ear, and it really connected with me. I think just kind of going back and seeing somebody else's perspective from someone who was there at these events. And somebody's calling me on a Saturday morning.
Is it your extended car warranty?
No.
Oh.
It's my other phone.
So, final thoughts. I thought this was a great book. Great. If anyone's thinking about reading it, do it. It was worth it.
And Jim Gray, you have an open invitation to come on the show. We reached out to you recently, and we haven't heard back yet. So, just FYI, your agent or your people are that note may not have made it to you. So I'm going to be sure to tag you in the release of this episode to know you have an open invitation to come on and talk to us.
Mine has all of his social media handles in the back.
Yeah. Well, mine too, because it's the same book.
So speaking of books, what's our next one?
Our next one is dealing with another controversial figure in the sports world. It is the autobiography, New York Times bestseller, Lucky Bastard by Joe Buck. So we'll be reading this, and we'll be talking about this one next month. So this book came highly recommended. A lot of people cannot stand Joe Buck for whatever reason. I personally like him. His interviews that he does with like Howard Stern and others are very funny. I think he's and he understands that, like, I mean, the title of his book is Lucky Bastard. His dad was, legendary announcer Jack Buck. And he knows that he's in his career, got to his career as quickly as his did because his father's a legend, and he pokes fun of himself all the time. And can you really be that bad of a guy if you're aware of your situation that you can poke fun of yourself? Like, really? But I guess a lot of people have read this book have said that their opinion of him changed. I already have a pretty decent opinion of him, so I'm really looking forward to this.
Okay. So that wraps up our first episode Play by Play. If you have any books you want to recommend to us, hit us up on social media.
Oh, and subscribe to this channel.
Yeah.
Can I wrap?
Yep.
All right. So check us out at stadiumscene.tv, at Stadium Scene on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and TikTok, at stadium_scene on Instagram. Hit the subscribe button again so you never miss an episode, and we'll see you next time.